Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Mark Allen, president of the Grand Haven Spring Lake Ferrysburg Chamber of Commerce. Today's town hall is a collaboration between the Grand Rapids, Grand Haven, and Muskegon Lakeshore chambers in an effort to provide information and clarification around the Earned Sick Time Act. Our agenda today includes a legislative update, a presentation on compliance and implementation, followed by a Q&A session. The slides from the presentation will be sent to each of you in a follow-up email. We are also recording today's town hall, and a link will be posted to each of the chamber websites. With that, I would like to introduce Joshua Lunger, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Grand Rapids Chamber, to provide us with a legislative update. Josh?
Thanks, Mark, and thank you all for joining us. I'm going to briefly detail where things sit in the legislature. It's probably making it more complicated and not less complicated for you as you navigate this. Before Lisa then kind of shares how you should be implementing and get some questions on that. And I can take questions later, but I'm going to go through this kind of quickly so we can get to the actual implementation discussion. So let me get my slides started. So the big news is that the Michigan House of Representatives just a week ago, with bipartisan support, passed House Bills 4001 and 4002. 001 is the tipped wage and minimum wage, but we're focused more on 4002 today, which is the Earned Sick Time Act. Our business coalition, which includes basically every business association I can have ever encountered in Michigan, has really worked to stay together and focus on how do we make this pending legislation more workable, particularly for small employers, avoid the administrative burdens, and just generally clean it up. It's less about reducing benefit levels because that's not something that there's a ton of support for in the legislature, and more about making it just a more workable solution for your teams. So what we're really focused on is exempting small business and certain classifications of workers, cleaning that up, allowing front loading of time and avoiding tracking and carryover requirements, so some of that administrative burden, giving businesses more flexibility to combine and earn and sick time with PTO, so allowing for a single bucket that's a little bit cleaner than the current way you'd have to do it, avoiding that one-size-fits-all approach to advance notice and increments of time, recognizing that different businesses have different needs, and striking the private right of action and leaving the enforcement of this with the state. Again, our coalition includes the chambers on this call and colleagues from across the state of every industry type and size. So real quick, the thing that'll be confusing is, yes, the Michigan House passed these bills. The Michigan Senate has legislation on the issue as well that are not nearly as aligned with what the business associations are pushing for. But it was great that they introduced something and are having conversations on it. We are suggesting changes and trying to figure out that landing spot. So the House bill exempts small businesses with less than 50 employees. It clarifies which employees are eligible. It retains the accrual method with usage kept 72 hours, but limits carryover to 72 hours. It recognizes that employers who front load 72 hours do not need to carry over. So that's, again, trying to improve the tracking. Permits the single PTO bank that can be used for all purposes, and eliminates the wording of same terms and conditions. That is really, and maybe Lisa will hit on it later, that's really one of the key things that's forcing a lot of businesses to consider separating a single PTO bank, because if you offer it as one bank, you have to allow it all under the same conditions as Earned Sick Time Act, which has some downsides. It allows employers to acquire advance notice and notification aligning with that employer's customary notice. And then you can limit the use of leave to 1 hour increments. As you might hear, right now it's whatever the smallest amount that you track in. Eliminates rebuttable presumption and the private right of action, and allows employers to require employees to take ESTA concurrently with FMLA or any other applicable law. The Senate bill defines small business with less than 25 employees, but does not exempt. It requires still the 40 hours paid, 32 hours unpaid. It allows small businesses to front load 40 hours of pay and 30 hours of unpaid should be 32, earn sick time at the beginning of the year. It retains the accrual method, but permits front loading as an alternative, but you have to retain that carryover. Carryover from year to year can be limited to 144 hours if the employer pays the employee the value of the unused sick time. If the employer does not pay it, carryover is capped at 288. It also, like the House bill, allows employers to limit use to 1 hour and eliminates rebuttable presumption in the private right of action. So that's really the two key components where they align, is on the use of time and the private right of action. The rest of it, again, the House version is much preferable for those of us that are trying to make this improve. So I'll leave this slide up and we'll bring it back later. We are all tracking this. We work very closely together. I'm meeting with the Senate Majority Leader today. We're trying to figure out how do we find a sweet spot with very limited time left. We've got about 24 days. I'm looking at Jackie. My math's not always best. But the House passing it starts this process. We know that the governor and the speaker have previously done a decent job of talking about the issue and where they could settle at. It's really down to, will the Senate take action? The word is that the Senate is feeling the pressure. They're hearing from constituents. There's more of a growing understanding that they need to do something. The question is, with a very limited time and other issues that'll get connected to it, is there the willingness to find a workable compromise? I can tell you, I don't want to look into a crystal ball too much with this, but the final version will not be House Bill 4002. We will not see something that aligned with what the business community is asking for, but we could see a lot of workable implementation around how you have to track it and how you can require notice from employees. And I think there's a lot of efforts going on right now, and we will continue to over communicate. You can follow along on our website. You can email any one of us for updates, and we are always happy to connect with you on this. It is our top priority. I would say we're working on it every day, multiple times a day, and we know how urgent this is. And we also know that you are doing things like this to go ahead and try to figure out how to implement it. And then we're still out there kind of waving a flag, say, oh, this might change still. So we deeply regret the uncertainty that's been created by the Supreme Court decision and are doing everything we can to support your business. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Lisa Sabourin from the American Society of Employers, who's going to talk about best practices for implementation. And I got to stop my share.
Great. You can see my slides now? All right, excellent. First, I'd like to thank the chambers and all your advocacy teams for your really tireless work on this, on ESTA. Without your diligence, we wouldn't have any hope of relief or clarity for this act. We certainly have encouraged our members to contact the legislators ever since the Supreme Court decision. With the many great presentations that the Chamber has done and we have done, I'm going to skip the how we got here part of it and just jump into more of what it really is and what we'll have to consider. So, but first, I've been proud to be a part of an employer association for over 30 years now. We support organizations in HR to effectively and positively manage their talent. I started right when FMLA started, and that was just as much fun as ESTA. We've managed to get through that. We'll get through this. But at ASE, or American Society of Employers, we are a membership organization with about 1,200 members across the state, about 500,000 employees that we cover. We have 2 labor attorneys. We have all the samples, data, information you might need, but we do not provide actual legal counsel. And that's because many of you have such unique circumstances that really do need to be reviewed. I'm hoping to cover most of those circumstances this morning. But of course, as Joshua said too, things may change. So this is effective as of this morning. So what's in ESTA? And some of it Joshua covered with the bills. But first, again, it's all Michigan employers, which means it covers all employees working in Michigan, whether they're working remotely or in your facilities. It does not cover employees who are working remotely in a different state, nor does it cover people who are based in another state, like your salespeople. Because I caution you, though, because those states may have their own laws to worry about. It brings in the salaried employees, which we didn't have under PMLA before, hourly, part-time, interns, temporary. We accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours worked, up to a 72-hour max use per year, but currently no accrual limit. There is carryover unused accrued time that's required at this time. The small business exemption is less than 10 employers, and Joshua mentioned the Senate bill says less than 25. So again, provide 40 hours paid, 32 unpaid. Joshua mentioned that general PTO policy. A lot of us have that one bank policy that says, year 1, you get 2 weeks, year 3, you get 3 weeks, that sort of thing. And we'll touch a little bit more on that because that could be a little bit trouble. The other issue that we are very concerned about is this: when paying the leave, you have to calculate the equal rate of pay averaged to the hourly compensation the preceding pay period, which could include overtime pay. And we're usually used to the shift premium, but things like that, any kind of compensation from the week before. The increment leave is in the smallest increment that you track. So again, it could be that 6-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute. You can't require more than 7 days notice for foreseeable leave and unforeseeable as soon as practicable. You can't require documentation until after 3 days of leave. An employer will have to cover any cost. We saw this with FMLA too. There started to be a cost for documentation. Must allow reasonable time to provide that documentation. And again, reasonable isn't necessarily defined, and does not need to be detailed. At separation of employment, there is no requirement to pay it out. But if you do rehire within 6 months, you would have to reinstate any accrued leave. Some of the bigger concern is, though, that liability. So a couple things that are common in legislative acts are record retention, 3 years, 3-year statute of limitations, you can see there. We talked about how things may change, so there'll be a new poster. It's available in English and Spanish. You'll need to provide that for your remote workers as well. And just a note on posters, by the way, if you have 10% or more in your facility speaking a certain language, you should provide that poster for that language as well. You must provide notice in writing for the amount of leave required under the Act, the terms of use, additional employer rules, establish a benefit year. It can be calendar, anniversary, could be February 21st for this year. And then, of course, retaliation is prohibited, and the right to file a civil action complaint. You can do this in your policy, but best practice would be to have your policy also refer to the poster. There's no administrative remedy, so we can't require them to go through the Department of Labor or LEO first. There's a private right of action, so they can go straight to an attorney, which could mean higher damages, more class action suits. Non-compliance claims would also include administrative fines, back wages, limited damages, costs, attorney fees. You can just see the dollars just ratcheting up. Retaliation protection is common in most laws that we see today, but what is special to ESTA is that rebuttable presumption of retaliation. So it's not necessarily retaliating against them for using time, but if they are talking about the company violating compliance or informing others of their rights, maybe participating in an investigation, and you take any adverse action, you'll have this rebuttable presumption of retaliation, which means you're guilty, and it's a high hurdle to prove you're not. Okay, I want to get into the implementation of ESTA, but a couple things I want to remind you of too. There are other time off laws that we're going to have to navigate. So if you have 50 or more employees, you're already dealing with FMLA. At 15, ADA and Pregnant Workers Fairness Act come into play. Michigan Persons with Disabilities covers all employers in Michigan. And then, of course, you also have rules around company short-term disability or salary continuation rules. All of those have different notice and documentation rules, paid and unpaid time, and you can't force employees to double dip. For instance, if they're on your short-term disability and they're getting 66 2/3%, you can't require them to use ESTA. You can give them the option to maybe use 33 1/3 to make them whole, but you can't require it. You could also have them use ESTA for the waiting periods in that. Also under ESTA, for salaried exempt employees, we can assume that they work 40 hours unless you have some other documentation that says otherwise. If I'm scheduled all the time for 50 hours, or my job offer said I worked 50 hours, or my job offer says I worked 25 hours, those are the hours that you should presume that I work as a salaried individual. But be sure your salaried people are classified correctly. The same goes for your independent contractors, because again, there could be a lot of litigation on this if they don't clean things up with one of these bills. So you definitely want to make sure you're starting off on the right foot with those classifications. And then just a reminder, it's 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. So vacation, holiday, short-term disability, those kinds of things would not count as hours worked. The 21st is coming fast. We've talked a lot about things could change. There is commonality in both bills, so we likely will see some help. Draft your policy, don't publish it yet, but you will implement and post by February 21st. 2 policy structures to consider. Are we front-loading that time versus an accrual? And some of you already front-loaded time January 1st, and we can talk about that too. Front load can be easier to track, but you must meet that 72 hours every year, including that first year of hire, if they would have accrued that much, I would say. An accrual, I would recommend that you consider that for your part-timers, interns, and those that you hire in the first year. Have them accrue until they reach that next benefit year, say January 1. Are we doing one bucket, one PTO bucket? Or are we doing 2 buckets? That one PTO bucket, remember, like I said, if you'll have in there, you get 2 weeks vacation at start, you get 3 weeks vacation at 5 years, you get 4 weeks vacation at 8 years, and so on. The problem that we're concerned about is, and I've heard different opinions by attorneys, is that you can't control that additional time. So under ESTA, they have to be able to use that 72 hours on an emergent basis, right? I'm sick this morning. That would be the same for any additional time that you might have. That 3rd week, we wouldn't necessarily be able to require them to schedule it. We can certainly encourage them to, but it could be a problem to require them to. You also, in your policy, want to clarify any carryover or payout. So here's a sample policy, or here's the elements and sections that we recommend in a policy. This is available, and again, you're going to get these slides. This is available on our frequently asked questions. There's a full sample for 1 bucket and 2 bucket. But again, remember that you need to supply in writing establishing a benefit year. That's this accrual start time. The amount of leave required under the Act and the usage of the Act. And any other additional rules that you might have. And then, of course, about job protection and retaliation. And again, you're going to refer to the poster as well, just to help cover yourselves. And then payout. If you do want to do a payout at the point of, at the end of the year or at the time of termination, you do need to specifically put that in your policy, that you have either payout or no payout, and then who in the organization to contact. All right, so here's the rest of your checklist as you're considering implementing ESTA. First of all, clean up your attendance policy. We've learned from multiple FMLA cases and also from the Unemployment Insurance Agency that a good call-in procedure is kind of our magic protective bubble. So they may still get ESTA time or FMLA time, but if they cannot call in and follow our procedures, we can still discipline them up to and including termination. So that call-in procedure could be, you have to call this number and identify what the leave is for, vacation, ESTA, bereavement, you name it. That number usually goes to HR. But then they also might have to text their supervisor as well and let them know that they wouldn't be in. And you can set, 2 hours in advance, whatever you want to set there. Okay. The other thing to consider with your attendance policy is with ESTA, they could have possibly 9 full days. They could have 18 half days. So you might want to start to reduce the number of points. Oftentimes in attendance policy, we'll see 10 points that would trigger termination. So you may want to reduce that down to 4 or 5, because if they're already gone for all the ESTA, how much more additional time do we want to give them? You'll want to be very clear about the documentation that you can require and things like return to work. Many times we'll see policies that say if you're gone 3 or more days, we need a return to work. So that's fine, but you just need to be clear about it. The other policy to take a look at is your holiday policy. A lot of us have rules like you must work the day prior to and the day after in order to receive holiday pay. So you want to make sure that you're not just penalizing ESTA. If I call in for ESTA, I don't get the pay. So you'll have to use what they call the FMLA guidance, where we're looking at the types of leave. Is it paid, unpaid? Is it scheduled, unscheduled? So if you allow for vacation, bereavement, jury duty, most other leaves, and you don't allow for FMLA or ESTA, that certainly could be a problem. Your no call, no show policy is perfectly fine. The unemployment agency accepts 3 days. So I've heard where some have 2 days. So you're perfectly fine to have that. My only caution here is that you go ahead on the 3rd day when you haven't seen Lisa, send that letter. Hey, we consider you to have voluntarily quit. You just might be a little slower in making me inactive in payroll or terming any kind of benefits that you have for me. Because it is possible that I could come back on day 4, 5, or 6 saying, hey, I was in a coma. And of course, then you have to provide the ESTA. You want to update your language with your independent contractors and temporary agencies for compliance with that they are responsible for compliance and that they will indemnify you for non-compliance. We actually had a question about this ahead of time. Thank you very much. So the question was, if a temp agency is considered their employer, are we able to end someone's assignment for attendance issues, or does ESTA usage still protect them from being removed from a temp assignment, even though they're not our employer? Well, the fact is that typically we're a joint employer, because when we have the temp in, we schedule their times, we supervise their work while they're here, and that kind of creates that joint employer situation. So it could get dicey, right, under that retaliation. So I would just caution you with it. With your temp and even your regular employees, be very quick to address any poor performance, any poor attitudes. Don't let it come down to just an attendance issue. If you do have attendance issues, you can certainly coach them. Hey, Lisa, we're seeing a pattern on this. Or we had a situation where an employee wanted PTO. They didn't get it because too many other people were off, and so then they called in sick. Yeah, we're going to have to let them have the ESTA, but we can certainly coach them that says, hey, this seems suspicious to us, right? And put them on notice that way. Talk with your payroll provider about implementation, coding, and tracking, but also reporting available time. So your employees need to know how much time they have available to them. This can be on their pay stubs. It could be in their payroll apps, you name it. Union contracts, you'll wait until the contract expires unless the collective bargaining agreement is silent on sick time. Then you do need to comply with ESTA. Now, careful with terminations. Be sure you've calculated all the accrued time and ensure that they did receive everything that was owed to them. And on that, you'll also want to true up, possibly quarterly or semi-annually. Annually as required by the Act. Talk with your salaried people. This is new for them, right? They're usually not reporting when they go to the doctor. They're flexing their schedule. They may have unlimited PTO. So talk with them about this. We're not trying to be Big Brother. We have tracking and reporting requirements that we have to do. And explain to them what ESTA is. The same goes for your supervisors, but on the other side with your supervisors, you want to be sure to warn them about retaliation, right? We're not going to pick on people because they've been using a lot of time. We're not going to tell them to shut up when they're talking to employees about their rights, those sorts of things. And the last thing I had here is kind of communication best practices. Again, the full sample is provided in this footer here at our frequently asked questions page, but you want to simplify the legalese and avoid jargon, comparison charts. You want to highlight benefits. If you're using that 2-bucket policy, you want to explain that you didn't rob from one for the other. Explain that they're still getting their same amount of time, because most of us were already providing pretty close to what is required under ESTA. So that's a quick overview of everything to watch out for. So now we can get into actual questions and circumstances.
All right, Lisa, I've got the chat up. For those of you that haven't asked a question yet, please go ahead and put it in the chat. The first one, is there a difference if the company front loads by calendar year or by anniversary date?
There's no difference on that. Calendar or anniversary is going to be a little hinky this year because of the February 21st and how that falls. It's a little bit of a problem from the January 1. We're concerned that if we front loaded the time and they've already used it in January, are we going to have to give them more time? Hopefully that gets cleaned up with some of the bills. A lot of the attorneys say if you define your benefit year and you provide at least 72 hours in that benefit year, you should be okay. Calendar year or anniversary time also takes a little bit more tracking, but if it's what you've been doing, I would encourage you to don't stray too far from what you've already had.
The next question was, what are thoughts of getting the small business size to more than 10, 50, or 25? I'll get my crystal ball back out. Based on, it's been a consistent goal of our coalition to exempt businesses smaller than 50. We believe that is the best number, given it aligns with other benefits, federal benefits. What I'm hearing from the Senate consistently from their leaders involved in this effort is they get real squeamish when we talk about outright exemptions for employers based on size. I know that's a priority, especially for like the Small Business Association, some of my colleagues that I work with every day. We have a ton of small businesses under 50 employees, a majority of our members, and it's a priority for us. I think it is going to be one of the hardest things to accomplish, just based on my initial conversations of what the next few weeks could look like. Because that outright exemption, there was some bad reporting on it by a news source saying that 1.2 million people would lose their benefits if we exempt employers less than 50. Just assuming that everyone that's eligible would not provide benefits, kind of demonizing small businesses. That has been repeated often now by legislators as a reason to not support an exemption. And so we are going to do everything we can to try to provide some type of small business exemption. Again, you saw the Senate raises it from 10 to 25, but it's not an exemption. It's just you provide 32 hours unpaid instead of the 72 hours total, or to get to the 72 hours total. But it's going to be hard. So I would not hold out hope that we are able to get that number to 50 and have it be an actual exemption.
I agree. And from people I talk with, maybe that 25 threshold, maybe 20, I think if we're really hoping for that 50, it's kind of why we're here again, why they took it all the way to the Supreme Court. So we're not going to see under 50, I don't think, but maybe we'll see something.
Will you answer the question about temp agencies? Does the count of employees for defining small include non-Michigan employees? This is one that's been messy, I think, with the department too.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't recall a clear definition on that. I know there were talks about all FICA employees. I could update that when we send out the slides.
Okay. Can you make a note of that too, Jackie? That's one that we've heard kind of a lot of confusion on. The House bills clarify that out-of-state employees do not count. Again, hopefully we can get that resolved. There's some things that the State Department agrees with us on, and we want to see it in writing, something like that. For tipped employees, confirming they will get paid the minimum wage for their sick time. So the question is, will a tipped employee get the minimum wage for the earned sick time that they use?
That's right. They'll get the minimum wage. And you don't have to calculate for tips and that sort of thing.
Okay. The 30 hours worked, is that per pay period or just a rolling total of hours?
A rolling total of hours for every 30. So if I work 60 in a pay period, I'm getting 2 hours or 1.5.
To possibly combat the additional attendance issues that ESTA may introduce, would an attendance bonus be acceptable to employ without violating ESTA?
Again, go ahead. I was going to say, again, that gets very gray. And with this retaliation clause as it stands right now, I'd be very concerned about attendance bonus and excluding for ESTA.
Confirming that employee can start accruals day one of employment, but they have a 90-day waiting period.
Yes, so actually they can take the time on the 90th day, by the way.
That's a good catch. Um, and somebody did answer it good. If you were to do two buckets, would the employee be able to transfer time out of ESTA and place it in the vacation bucket?
Yeah, so ultimately it kind of works just like that one bucket, basically. Hey, up to 72 hours you can use on this emergent basis for ESTA reasons, but the whole bucket could be used for vacation. So if I use all of that bucket for a cruise here in February, then I've used up my ESTA time as well on a front load basis. If you're on a accrual basis, it's a little bit different math.
If our staff are above the PTO threshold with current policies, do we still follow ESTA rules for the use of sick time and attendance?
Absolutely. Certainly make them aware of the 6 points from the poster. It needs to be in your policy and all those other things that I said as far as right now, the retaliation, you have to include that in your policy.
And that's one of the things that I know we're really focused on with the trying to get the final compromise to strike those language using essentially the same way as ESTA, because it would give you the flexibility to do a single PTO bucket. If you do a single PTO bucket, you have to provide that entire bucket as if it was ESTA, and then you have all those complications. If our contract CBA has part-time staff receiving less than ESTA, do we need to increase before renewal to meet the minimum requirement?
So if the collective bargaining agreement currently has something in place for sick leave, then you can wait till that agreement expires. If you're silent on sick leave, then you will need to have a sick policy that will include bringing those part-timers up to ESTA.
If we put all PTO in one bucket and treat all as ESTA, do we have to track time used for ESTA reasons?
Yes, the law currently says that we have to track the time used and the accrual amount. It actually doesn't talk about the carryover, but you're certainly going to be doing that as well.
Do staffing agencies accrue these costs, or can it be passed along to employers?
For the staffing agency, the employee is their employer or their employee, so they need to be doing all the tracking for that individual. It's just if we want to term an employee that the joint employer concern comes into play. So yes, a staffing agency would treat all their employees with ESTA.
Do you think there'll be changes made to this prior to February 21st?
I
I got asked this yesterday.
Yeah.
I got asked this yesterday. I just looked over at the majority leader. I was like, do you want to answer this? To me, it feels like it is significantly more likely than last year. It's probably, in my opinion, like 51%. If I'm wrong, you can blame Mark and Rachel. We'll just throw them under the bus. But we do have some momentum. There are conversations, but there's some things that make me worried that this won't get done, such as, again, what gets tied to it. There's bills that eliminate the ability to use independent contractors in Michigan that the Senate really wants to tie to this. There's no way, even if the business community would sign off on this, which we won't, there's no way the House Republicans would ever pass those bills for an ESTA deal. And so if the expectations of the trade are not based in reality, we will quickly lose all traction. So again, I am trying to be optimistic that we will make some changes, but they will likely, again, they're not going to look like what the House passed last week. If an employee is flat rate, do we calculate their time with their billed hours or the actual time they are clocked in?
The actual time, it's the rate based on the actual time they're clocked in.
How do you calculate folks that are working on commission? How do you do these hours? We shouldn't laugh at these questions because they're very serious, but it's kind of like we're all in this together.
Right. Again, you're going to look at the hours worked and the rate that they've received. They use, and I know it's really weird for commission because commission can be based over a longer period of time, but it is the most recent pay period for commission employees as well, and then dividing by hours of work to get an hourly rate for them.
If we assume 40 hours for salary exempt workers, do we need to accrue more time for ESTA if they work over 40 a week?
No, if you assume that they work 40, you can continue to use the 40, even though certain projects they may work more. But remember, if I'm scheduled for 50 hours regularly, then you would use the 50-hour mark.
Is there a rough time frame for the next steps of legislative action or milestones? So how this works, and I've been trying to get better about explaining the process. The House has passed a bill. The Senate can do a few things. They could do nothing, which would be the worst. They can pass their own Senate Bill 15 and send it to the House. They can amend House Bill 4002 and send it back to the House. But ultimately, what has to happen is that House and Senate have to pass the same language. And then the governor has to be willing to sign it. We're trying to figure out where the governor sits on this. Based on last year's lame duck negotiations, the Senate was more of the obstacle from what I've heard. Mainly, there's a lot of rumors. The governor was willing to make deals. The road funding, I guess, stuff keeps getting tied into this. Again, the hard part is we have 24 days, and that is basically a blink of an eye in legislative time. But deadlines do make legislators work harder. They're like college students, right? It's like when you get your paper due date coming up, you finally sit down and start writing. So the next step, I think, that shows real willingness to move forward would be a hearing in the Senate. The Senate will have to refer the bills to committees today, I believe. Looking at Jackie. I believe they're referring to bills to committees today. And then they haven't actually been in for session yet. So if they start scheduling days of session and a committee hearing, that's how we know we're taking forward steps. Where was I? Our workforce is salaried and PTO time is based on honor system, and recording time off is not necessary. Are we now required to have employees report and track time off?
You are. Yep, that's the one thing to start talking with them about now. You can keep your same policy, and you'll need to add that language, but you'll have to have them reporting.
For seasonal salaried employees, can we front load based on the amount of time they are working?
You can, but again, that's that true up basis. So, you, especially for seasonal, you're going to have to check in regular intervals to make sure that they did get their time that they would have accrued, which is why in those circumstances, I recommend an accrual system.
Can we use different benefit years for different pay classes? Example, hourly accrues based on anniversary, salary accrues based on calendar year.
Yes, that's possible. It gets pretty mucky then for you. So I'd caution you on that. I'd really caution you to consider the anniversary. But again, I'd also caution you not to stray too far from what you've already been doing.
We have heard conflicting opinions about calculating the regular rate of pay and whether overtime rates should be included or whether it only includes variable rates such as, piece rates or travel premiums. Should weekly overtime impact this calculation?
So I've heard mixed definitions from the attorneys. Basically, all compensation from the week prior should be included in that. Overtime is definitely one that they've called out. Shift premium is another one. Travel pay, some of that they call fringe benefits. And the law says, no, we don't have to include fringe benefits. But then again, if you've called it part of their compensation, that could be something to review with your legal counsel on.
If a full-time employee works 50 hours per week, do they need to have 86.66 hours of ESTA accrued? So that's 1:30 ratio.
Yes, they'll keep accruing based on whatever hours that they work, but still limited to 72 hours use in a year, in a benefit year.
Someone wants to clarify if this is possible. If we front load, are we required to carry over?
Everyone is required to carry over, but it's kind of a moot point because the next year they're going to get 72 hours again that you're going to limit use at.
For our team, we've kind of said, you're going to see this big number on the side if you don't use it all. Don't worry about that number, but it'll be there, but you don't need to worry about it because it's just a meaningless accrual when you can say 72 a year.
Yeah, the only That
Go
helps is
ahead.
when you are on an accrual system, right? So that helps them have time in January, maybe February if they needed the leave. But on a front load, it's really a moot point. But you are carrying it over and tracking it.
Also, if we hire someone mid-year, do we still have to give the full 72 front load and then make them wait 90 days to use? Or can we calculate how many hours they would actually be able to accrue in the remainder of that calendar year?
So you could do the accrual and front load what you estimate, but you would have to true up, right? If they accrue more, which again is why I encourage you to accrue in that first year for the one. You only have to give one for every 30 hours. So you don't have to give the full 72 when I start in August and I'm going to start over again in January, basically, right? And again, they get to use it on the 90th day.
Someone again asked if we front load 80 hours or more each year, do we still need to track and record ESTA specific use? You said yes. That is, again, one of our hopes that we can fix that in the legislation to remove the administrative burden. For temp agencies, is there a statute of limitation between assignments in regard to having to start over accruing hours? Man, very specific, tough questions.
No, because I would imagine it's a rolling clock of the 30 hours they work. If they work for company ABC for 15 of them and company XYZ for 60 more, you're just going to keep tracking 1 hour for every 30 hour from where they work.
Someone asked again about timeline, anticipated time frame when these bills will be passed. Again, I think the best answer I can give you is let's look for the first hearing in the Senate and continue to stay engaged with us. Do we have to comply with ESTA, with the way ESTA is stated, and then make changes after the bill is passed if it doesn't get passed by 221? Yes. If we pass something after the 21st, unfortunately, you're going to be considering changing again and having to go and explain to your teams all over again. We are trying to pressure as much as we can the legislators to understand that. I think we mentioned it earlier, and we'll keep mentioning it. If you have not communicated with your legislator the importance of taking action before the 21st, please do so. Or if you have, do it again. Your stories mean a lot. You're not bothering them. This is what their job is. And it helps the ones, especially the ones that want to help us, it gives them something to talk about so that they know that their district, that their constituents need a fix here. We really don't want to keep yanking you all around or the employees around with changes and creating more uncertainty. So we're really focused on that date. Unfortunately, we heard from the House Minority Leader saying that they feel that the date is fabricated by the Republicans, and just there's a lot of kind of nonsense going around, but we are going to keep focusing on getting something done before that date. We have less than 10 employees, but we front load 40 hours of sick time annually on 1/1. I read if you have less than 10 employees, you don't have to allow 72. Is that true? And am I all set already?
Well, you would have the 10 is great, and that meets that threshold of 40 hours paid time, but you would have to also accrue for the 32 hours unpaid.
How will this affect hourly employees that hours vary week to week? For example, seasonal employees.
Again, just keep that rolling, 1 hour for every 30 hours. Consider those people being on an accrual basis.
We have CDLA drivers, local or fine, but over the road and or dedicated, we pay flat rates or cents per mile. So we would have to do a true up with hours from logs, our service logs, for audit purposes, correct?
Correct.
And we'd assume that they'd be at 72 hours for the year, but we need a paper trail. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Would it be considered compliant if we offer employees the option to roll over ESTA time or pay out at 100% at the end of the calendar year?
Yes, you can't force a payout, but you could give them an option to pay out. We encourage you to probably consider a cap for what you might pay out at termination and also what you might pay out at the end of the year.
How about minors?
They're included if they're on your payroll.
Can you speak more about the payout options for unused time? The statute suggests that you have to carry a balance over, but many employers already have paid out unused sick time to employees. And if they were to stop doing that, it would be a huge takeaway for hourly workers who are hoping for an additional payout.
Yeah. Again, make it in an option form. They have the option to do this, not you're mandating it, and consider that cap for the payout.
This is a good one that we just dealt with. If an employer uses one bucket framework and there is current annual PTO buyout payout policy, would that buyout payout apply to ESTA hours as well?
Yeah, same kind of question. Again, not forced, option 2.
Yep. Do either of the bills address seasonal employees or average hours for eligible staff? Yes, the House version, I don't know if I've got the hours written down.
It's 25 weeks or less.
Yeah.
25 weeks or less for seasonal are exempt, and hourly is
Part-time.
25 hours or less average.
Yeah.
Again, I caution trying to figure out what's my paranoia and fear. I caution optimism around that because of what I'm hearing from the Senate, that they really don't want anyone that would be receiving benefits coming up to be losing those benefits. And that is a talking point that their caucus is really stuck on. And so I would say, along with the outright exemption for small businesses, an outright exemption for part-time and seasonal is going to be a really big mountain to climb. Let me see where I got. I think I've answered some of these. A lot of questions on front load. I know a lot of employers are trying to figure out how do we not take away from our employees. If we front load, place in one bucket, track separately, under current policy, the 72 hours do not carry over, and we do not pay out when an employee leaves. I'm trying to see. I think we answered that.
Remember, you have to carry over. You do have to carry over.
Is there clarification for salaried employees with non-paid hours?
Salary employee non-paid.
I don't know what that means.
They might be thinking of project work or something like that. Again, you'd go back to what were they regularly scheduled, or what was their job assignment, 40 hours, 50 hours, that sort of thing, and use that.
For 2025, does it still need to be 72 hours? As not all weeks are included, and they're planning on doing calendar year and accrual.
That's correct. They may not accrue the full 72 hours in this year. Let's say your benefit year is January 1. So they may not accrue that all this year. But then some of you have people who work 60 hours a week, and they might very well accrue it. So again, just being sure to track or accrue 1 hour for every 30 hours.
Someone asked about work hours earned versus vacation and holiday hours. And I'm guessing that means, do people accrue during time off?
It's actual hours worked, so no time off.
If we have an employee that lives in another state, here's the fun one, but comes into Michigan to work for a weekend, would this now not apply?
I don't believe so for that weekend. If you had a regular assignment, then I think you would want to have a conversation with your legal counsel on that, or give me a call, right? We can talk about it. But twice a year, I don't know that that's really going to trigger it.
I've also been encouraging people to email Leo and get it in writing.
Sure.
Although we know that this private right of action still currently exists, and so we have that challenge as well. We have 3 weeks of vacation time and 1 week of sick time for our team to use. Do we need to update this to provide 72 hours of sick time now? We can't use our vacation time as 72 sick time since they are separate, ? Should we keep this separate still?
You do have to update it so that you provide at least the 72 hours if they would have accrued it. And that's where the employees kind of feel like you're robbing from one bank for the other bank. So just be very clear that they're still getting the same amount of time that they would have had. Just how they can use it might be a little bit different. In the 2 buckets, you have more control over how they can use it, as opposed to the 1 bucket policy.
Are owners and commission salespeople eligible?
Yes.
I guess that's the thing that I keep telling me. There are no exemptions, right?
Right.
If they're
All
working,
employees.
they're all employees. We operate as a temporary agency. We have people who no call, no show on day 1. And those companies will have to ask those people to be taken off assignment. What is your advice on this circumstance? How can we be liable as the staffing agency for not having a job for them to go to?
Yes, we talked about this for quite a bit. And that, kind of the reverse of that is if they've been working for me for 30 days and then I decide, that I want to terminate it again under that joint employer, the accepting employer might be on the hook. But as far as the temporary agency goes, that's a very tough call. I mean, there certainly are some issues, and I would encourage you to talk through legal counsel of how you write that into your policy, because but if the retaliation piece gets cleaned up, you'll have a lot more leeway there.
Someone asks, it's very likely that we will have to lay off a large part of our staff due to ESTA. As a small nonprofit, we cannot incur this cost. Has there been any discussion about this occurring across the state at a wider scale? So layoffs or loss of jobs in general. And they're a 24-hour agency that must be staffed at all times, and the majority of staff is part-time due to the cost of benefits. I will just say that this is part of the challenge that we have, and we're trying to educate the legislators on that. If you haven't spoken up, you should. I even got an email maybe a month ago from a pretty major nonprofit here in West Michigan that just wanted to clarify this doesn't apply to nonprofits. And so I'm really worried that a lot of folks out there, business and nonprofit, are still unaware of this and are going to get blindsided and don't fully understand the cost and the administrative burden and the challenges that will come with it. We have been talking ad nauseum with legislators about the potential here. We hear a lot from the hospitality industry too. That's the other one that's probably the most impacted because of the no call, no show, because of the tipped wage changes. And they are very vocal, very, very much speaking in favor. But we just need more people to speak up. Unfortunately, if legislators don't have a lot of direct outreach from their district, or they don't have trusted relationships with small business or nonprofit leaders, they might not quite, I don't want to say they don't believe us. They might not see the urgency and the imperative around it just from association speaking up. That's why you are your best lobbyist on these issues.
Well,
Go ahead.
as I say, tell your friends for sure, because ESTA is not going away, and every employer is going to likely have to comply. So be careful with that.
We answered about seasonal. Can you front load all current employees but put new hires on an accrual basis?
Yes, I like that method.
Do new employees need to start accruing right away, or can we leave a 90-day waiting period?
They accrue right away, use it on the 90th day.
Oh, can employees use ESTA hours that bring their balance negative, knowing it will increase with accrued hours that are coming?
That's your policy to set. Some employers have let people go negative. I would be careful with it under ESTA at this time. But if that's how you've been working, like I said, don't stray too far or people will feel cheated.
Someone asks again about accrual for frontline employees and then maybe front loading managers. Is there any concerns there?
Not necessarily. As long as everybody gets the 1 hour for every 30 accrued. So
can we front load less than 72 hours if we are in a high turnover environment?
yes, but again, that's where you might consider that accrual basis. We have one company who accrues for the first 3 years and then turns them to a front load because of the turnover, right?
Can we require a form to ESTA benefits, or at least claiming ESTA benefit?
I'm sorry.
Like require a form to be filled out?
Yes, that would be a great way. And I would include other things like vacation, bereavement, ESTA,
Someone asked, is it correct that employees can only use the amount they've accrued, even if it's less than 22 hours? That is correct. Dental office that has subs on the payroll and we are required to have them on payroll. Do they count as employees? They can work 1 day a year, or some might cover a few weeks a year.
If they're on payroll, they count. They're just not accruing any hours until they actually work.
Okay. Oh man, this one's kind of getting complicated too. Can you explain how employees that regularly work more than 40 hours would accrue and how their pay is calculated if they are also commissioned?
That one is going to be based on circumstances and understanding your commission as well. But again, however many hours that they've accrued, what their pay was in the previous pay period is what you're looking at. But I'm happy to talk to you about that one offline.
Okay, I'm trying to make sure I'm not getting too repetitive, but some of these are just slightly tweaked. If we already allow employees to roll over up to 80 hours from year to year PTO, and an employee doesn't use any PTO for ESTA reasons, would we need to allow them to roll over an additional 72 hours or whatever they accrued for ESTA?
For you, whatever they have accrued for ESTA, right, is what you're rolling over. So again, if I front load 80 hours and Lisa used it all, Lisa used, let's say you give me 3 weeks and I use 2 weeks for vacation, I have 1 week left, then theoretically I have 1 week of ESTA time yet.
Another question about advancing hours, and that you answered that as an employee policy, if they need to go negative. Employer policy, I'm sorry. In trucking, driving turnover is higher than most industries. Can we do accrual for the first year and then anniversary going forward? Sounds like that is a yes.
Again, you want to do it based on classifications, not based on any kind of person, right? So you want to have a business reason for that classification to be treated differently.
We received notice from a staffing agency they will pass the cost on to us if the employee is still on site after 90 days. Are they able to do this?
Yeah, and that's something that you would negotiate with them, but also clean up that language that they're the one who has to comply and they'll indemnify you.
So you've answered that about different PTO rules for different types of employees, but you talked about classification. Okay, here's one. I heard on a different webinar, and I'm aware that some even lawyers have been disagreeing, and the State Department keeps changing their mind by an attorney that if you have one bucket and the employee used most for vacation, but then needed sick time and did not have the 72 hours left, you have met the requirement hours they are entitled to under ESTA. Is that correct?
That's likely correct. As long as you gave them 72 hours that they could use and they chose to use it some other way, then they've exhausted. Now, that doesn't mean some of this other leave that I mentioned might kick in, right? FMLA, ADA, they may have some unpaid time that might be available under some of those other laws.
If you're front loading an employee uses all their time and then leaves the company, is there any recourse for the employer to collect?
Not necessarily. You got to be careful about deductions from paychecks. You can usually take the money out of a vacation paycheck or last pay for vacation, but again, they're negative. So what are you going to take, right?
Someone asked the same question. Can we perform an accrual calculation at separation and hold back any time taken but not earned based on accrual, even if we front loaded? So a little bit more specific on that.
Yeah, again, that's kind of the small claims kind of situation that you might deal with, right? Okay. Trying to get that back from them. And again, to take money, you have to have them sign off for it.
Just trying to understand the question. Employer. So can an employer have one PTO bank of 72 hours and deduct time from an employee's bank if they take time off for other reasons than ESTA? I think you've answered that.
Based on your terms of use that you outlined, yes.
As a staffing agency, if our employee goes permanent with our client, does their time carry over since they are now with a new employer? Okay.
It carries over for the staffing agency, right? How many hours I worked for XYZ, now I'm working for ABC company, that time will continue to go. As far as if I hire them in, they start new with my company.
I'm going to do really quick here because I got the 1 minute and I want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. 90-day waiting period, is that only for new employees or current employees as well?
Well, really new employees, but anytime they restart, basically.
Someone asked if the House and Senate can't agree, can the chamber propose an amendment pushing it late into the year? I've pitched that. I pitched that last year during lame duck. It got shot down. I think the concern would be to get them willing to vote on pushing it. You have to get basically a lot of the same process. And so I think it's very unlikely that would occur, but we will try everything we can. What is the point of carryover of ESTA if you front load?
It's just a math exercise.
Can someone ask, can we pay ESTA as it's earned? Does that mean like pay out?
I would caution you on that. You want to ensure that you gave them the right to use the time. I would consider it at the end of the benefit year or upon termination, but not as they go.
If you have to use the prior week's comp, what if the prior week included a bonus, like an annual or semi-annual bonus or a Christmas bonus?
Yeah, again, that's going to be that conversation. Was it more of a fringe benefit or was it true compensation?
Are we required to show ESTA accrual time and used on an employee pay stub?
I haven't actually seen it in writing in the law, but most attorneys have said, yes, we have to let them know what time they do have available. So it's just easier that way.
I'm just going to do a time check with my friend Rachel. Do we want to stop? Is there any other questions that we feel like we haven't gotten to that we just really want to get to? Otherwise, what we could try to do is take these questions, answer them, and send it out as a follow-up to those that attended. Because I hate not answering questions, but I want to respect everyone's time. Any thoughts on that, Rachel or Mark?
Yeah, I think we could keep going for another hour. So,
You don't have all day?
I mean, well, yeah, gosh, sounds like a good team. If you guys can capture the questions that we still have out there, we can get some responses. So, yeah, so let's go ahead and wrap it up. And first, let's all thank Lisa. If you have a reaction or a high five, Lisa and the American Society of Employers for continuing to be, as you've seen, a tremendous resource for all of us as we march forward to February 21st. I don't know about you, but Wednesday, July 31 was a pretty normal day for us until this ruling happened and Lisa stepped out of her office and let us know this is going to be affecting all of us. And since then, she has been such an incredible resource to the chambers, to so many small businesses. So thank you, Lisa, for letting us continue to just grill you for half an hour of a lot of scenarios. I also really want to thank the Chamber of Grand Haven, Spring Lake, Ferrysburg, and the Grand Rapids Chamber, and all of our members for your continued support on this. This has not been a fun 181 days for all of us, but truly having the opportunity to find solutions to challenges like this facing your business is really what gets us all fired up to do the work we do. And we couldn't do it without your continued support and membership. So thank you so much for continuing your membership with all of our chambers. And just one final reminder that today's recording is recorded. It will be sent to you in a follow-up. And like we said, we will work to get those unanswered questions from the chat addressed. And there are so many more opportunities to get ESTA questions answered as we march forward to February 21st. So please keep an eye on your chamber communications and more opportunities to participate in events in person or virtual. And we can't stress enough and to encourage you to reach out to your legislatures. This is the time where your voice and influence them has the most power. So if you're looking for that contact information, please reach out to Mark, Josh, or I, and we are happy to help you get connected to your legislature. So I think, again, that's it. Thanks for letting us go over a little bit, and I hope everyone has a great, productive day in West Michigan. Thank you.